Imagine a world without clocks, where the sun, the shadow, and the stars are your only guides to the passage of time. But the question is, how did we go from counting hours with shadows to carrying atomic level precision in our pockets and on our wrists? You see, I think the story of timekeeping is the story of civilization itself, and really today. And we're going to be diving deep into humanity and how it's measured, controlled, and mastered time. But before we get into how we master time, I think it's important to talk about, well, why do we measure time and what is its importance overall? Because I think in some ways, humans have had this innate need to understand and organize the passage of time. And I've made other videos about that in the History of Time series. Feel free to check that out. But I think some of it at its root just stems from our connection to the natural cycles of life, like day and night, lunar phases, and seasonal changes. Early humans really needed a way to track time for practical reasons like hunting, farming, religious ceremonies. And as societies developed, accurate timekeeping became crucial for coordinating activities, trade, and governance. And with that impact on governance became a direct impact on civilizations and daily life. Timekeeping has profoundly shaped human civilizations. The development of calendars allowed for agricultural planning and the organization of large-scale projects. Accurate timekeeping facilitated navigation, exploration, and scientific advancement. And in modern society, precise timekeeping is essential from everything from transportation schedules to communication networks to scientific research and financial markets. It regulates our daily routines, work schedules, and societal interactions. And really, if you think about it at like a philosophical level, as humans developed calendars and clocks and timekeeping became more of the backbone of progress, it really guided our explorers across the oceans. It synchronized train schedules in the industrial age. It powers our modern life, from financial markets to the device that you're using to watch this video. And here at Wrist Unwound, we like to talk about where watches and stories meet. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the story of time, the story of timekeeping devices. How did we go from sundials to wristwatches to cell phones to so many more in between? So if you're interested in really understanding the history of the things that led to how we measure time today, this is definitely going to be the video for you. I'll also leave timestamps down below if you want to skip ahead, but I encourage you to listen to the whole story, because with one part missing, you kind of miss some of the context. But if you do want to skip ahead, just make sure you like and comment so that YouTube doesn't completely punish the algorithm. But with that, let's get into it. So the first chapter, as we look at the dawn of timekeeping and how it all worked, we have to begin with sundials. You see, sundials' origin, or the earliest known sundials, date back to ancient Egypt around 1500 BCE. Through simpler shadow clocks existed earlier, these early sundials were often simple vertical sticks, also known as gnomons, I think it's pronounced. But they basically just cast shadows on marked surfaces to understand how the time worked. So how they worked is a sundial uses the sun apparent movement across the sides to indicate time. The stick, or the gnome, cast a shadow, and the positions of the shadow on the dial indicate the hour. Different types of sundials exist, including horizontal, vertical, and equatorial sundials, each designed for specific latitudes and orientations. Now, some of the pros of the sundials were that they're simple. They require no maintenance other than like occasional cleaning, I guess, but they're accurate for determining solar time, which there is a difference for other types of time. We could talk about that a little bit later, which is basically the local time based on the sun's position. However, the biggest con with sundials are they're not usable at night or on cloudy days or indoors, and their accuracy really varies with the latitude and season. You see, sundials are a reminder of our reliance on the natural world. At best, when the sun is shining, they provided information and guidance. But at worst, when the cloudy days stems in or darkness took it away, that order that it had created was kind of ripped away as well. And maybe there's a deeper metaphor for that, but I'll let you think about that on your own. As we transition from the fire in the sky, let's transition back to the water down here on Earth, and we'll transition to around 16th BCE with the advent of water clocks, also known as Clapsidas. So the water clocks were developed in ancient Babylon and Egypt around the 16th BCE. The Greeks later refined the design, and sophisticated versions were also developed in China. So how these Clapsidas worked was they measured time that regulated the flow of liquid, usually water, from one container to another. The level of water in the receiving container indicates the elapsed time. There's also different designs that use an outflow or inflow of water, and some incorporated complex mechanisms to maintain a constant flow rate. Now, some of the pros with water clocks is they could operate continuously regardless of weather or time of day, making them more versatile than sundials, and they could also be used indoors. However, some of the cons were that they were still susceptible to inaccuracies due to temperature changes affecting water viscosity, and required regulating, refilling, and maintenance to ensure a consistent flow. So now, Because of some of their inaccuracies, I think that's why we transitioned from the water back to the fire in a different format, and we transitioned to these things called candle timers, or really a way of time by wax. Candle timers actually originated in China, possibly as early as 6th century CE, and they were later adopted in Europe. So how they work is these timers use a candle with markings at regular intervals, and as the candle burned down, the melting wax indicated the passage of time. Now the pro was candle timers were inexpensive, portable, and could be used indoors. However, the con was the burn rate of the candles is affected by various factors like air currents, wax quality, the candle thickness, making them highly inaccurate and difficult to reproduce a consistent rate every time. However, later on, a new type of device was used, and one that you still recognize today, even if you don't use it in everyday life, and that's going to be sand timers, which is really just that iconic hourglass. The origin of sand timers. They became widespread in medieval Europe around 14th century, although earlier examples may have existed. So how they work is it's an hourglass consisting of 2 glass bulbs connected by a narrow neck. A measured amount of sand flows from the top bulb to the bottom bulb at a consistent rate. Once all the sand is flowed through the hourglasses and burn it to start the process all over again. One of the biggest pros about these is sand timers are simple, they're portable, and they're relatively easy to rely on for measuring short intervals of time. They don't require external power or maintenance, and I actually use them in my everyday life. I typically keep one in my office just to, help me when I'm trying to study. We also use them for my daughter so that she knows how long to brush her teeth.
Subscribe.
However, the biggest cons of these is it's a fixed time interval, and they're not continuously running timekeepers. So every time that time interval flips, you have to switch it. And then depending on how accurate you need the time is, you would need to know how long it took you to flip it every time. But those are small things to take. Another thing though to keep in account that may or may not matter to you is also that the accuracy can actually be affected by the fineness and the humidity of the sand. One of the things that I appreciate about an hourglass and why I keep one in my office is that hourglass really reminds us that time is both fleeting and renewable. It's through our actions that we can hopefully make more time, but the time that has been lost can never be gained again. But that's just me, maybe just getting a little bit too deep, but I don't know. You let me know what you think down below. Next, we transition to the thing that led to many of our hobbies of collecting these timepiece devices. Or maybe you're not a watch collector and you're just watching this video because the YouTube algorithm gave it to you. Either way, the next chapter in the history of timekeeping devices is going to be mechanical clocks. And one of the things that these offered were precision and complexity. So some of their origins is the first mechanical clocks emerged in Europe in around the late 13th to the early 14th centuries. These early clocks were large, weight-driven devices, and they were typically installed in towers and public spaces, which is why you typically see them in, clock towers around churches. How they work is mechanical clocks use a system of gears and weights or springs and an escapement mechanism to regulate the movement of the clock's hands. The escapement controls the release of power from the weight or the spring, allowing the gears to turn at a precise rate and giving you an accurate and predictable time. So one interesting vignette about mechanical clocks is, while they became more precise and accessible, they were still very expensive early on. But there was one man in particular who revolutionized the industry in a way that still echoes to the world of timekeeping today. And that person is Eli Terry. You see, he was born in 1772, and Terry was a true innovator. He was a watchmaker who saw beyond the intricacies of gears and springs into the possibilities of mass production. In the early 1800s, owning a clock was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Most were handmade and expensive, but placing them far out of reach for the average household. But Eli Terry had a vision. What if timekeeping could be affordable for everyone? Terry's genius lay in his ability to standardize clock parts. Unlike the painstaking one-at-a-time craftsmanship of his contemporaries, he developed a system of interchangeable parts for his wooden clocks. This breakthrough allowed him to produce timepieces at an unprecedented scale. In 1806, he took his ambitious The Porter contract and agreeing to build 4,000 wooden clocks in just 3 years. And he believed setting the stage for mass production in the clockmaking industry. But in many ways, Terry wasn't just about the numbers. He was about the people. His innovations put the clocks on mantles and walls of homes across America. He helped transform timekeeping from a luxury into a necessity that everyone could use. His methods inspired other clockmakers like Seth Thomas and Chauncey Jerome, whose names would also be synonymous with accessible timekeeping. This decentralization of time didn't just stay confirmed to wooden clocks. Decades later, Terry's home state of Connecticut and his legacy would inspire a new company, the Waterbury Clock Company. And anyone who knows me, you know where this story is going to make a turn, but stay with me. So founded in 1854, Waterbury adopted the principles of mass production and the affordability that Terry had championed. Fast forward to the 20th century, the Waterbury would evolve into a brand we all know, Timex. While Eli Terry never worked with Timex directly, his fingerprints are all over the company's DNA. The same spirit that made clocks affordable for every family in the 1800s made wristwatches accessible to every wrist in the 1900s. Eli Terry may not have seen quartz watches or digital watch displays that dominate the world today, and we'll get into more of those later, but without his groundbreaking innovations, the idea of affordable, universal, and timekeeping may have never come. So as we explore the history of timekeeping, remember that it's not just about the devices we use to measure time. It's really about the visionaries who saw time itself as something worth sharing with everyone. Visionaries like Eli Terry. But let's get into the next aspect that he helped pave the way for and gets us more into things that we recognize today. With the next chapter being that portable precision, also known as pocket watches. So pocket watches appeared in the 16th century, becoming more common in the 17th and 18th centuries. How they work is that pocket watches are miniaturized versions of mechanical clocks using springs instead of weights to power the movement. The pros of pocket watches, they made timekeeping portable and accessible to individuals. The con is pocket watches were delicate and prone to damage, and their accuracy could really be affected by shocks and movements. And so that's why eventually we transitioned to what we now know as wristwatches. The benefit of wristwatches, they offered time at a glance. The origin of wristwatches began to gain popularity around the early 20th century, particularly during World War I, when soldiers found them more practical than pocket watches. And the reason for that is, as soldiers were integrated with the use of artillery and the timing of battle, it was important to understand where you were in the battlefield in space and time. However, to in the middle of a gunfight, pull out a pocket watch was not the most convenient. And so that was when men began to start wearing watches. Interesting fact as well is, before men wore them, they were typically known as wristlets and only were reserved for women. However, the veterans from World War I came back wearing watches, and that's what helped make it more popular in everyday society and culture. The question you might be wondering is, how do they work, right? So there's a lot of different watches, but basically early wristwatches were just smaller versions of pocket watches strapped to your wrist. Later developments included self-winding automatic mechanisms and improved accuracy. If you want a breakdown history of just watches themselves and how they've evolved, please let me know. But this video is more about the overall timekeeping devices. But let me know. I'm open to making more videos in the future. But the overall pro of wristwatches were they're convenient, they're easy to read, they're relatively durable, and there's just so much more you can do with them. And I think that's why many of us who are following this channel are watch collectors today. But there's another step that I think that is important to talking about is the transition to digital watches and smartphones. Timekeeping really got redefined with the advent of some of the digital watches and smartphones. Using electronic displays to show time emerged in the 1970s around the time of the quartz crisis. And the advent of smartphones in the 2000s further revolutionized timekeeping by integrating it into multifunctional devices. Generally speaking, digital watches use quartz crystals and electronic circuits to keep time, while smartphones rely on a network of time protocols, also known as NTPs, to synchronize their clocks with highly accurate atomic clocks. Now, there is a difference between atomic clocks and universal coordinated time, which is another video in the history of time that you should check out. But one of the things that I think this all brings me to is a question. And I wonder, as we carry these atomic precision in our pockets, have we lost something in that transition? Do you think that the ease of checking time stripped away its deeper meaning? Because as you hear in the story of time how difficult it was early on, or how it had to be democratized so that the average person could use it, I think maybe at those times it was appreciated more in understanding the importance of telling time. Now it's just something that we take for granted, that you can see everywhere from your phone to your pocket to on the TV screen or your laptop. I don't know. Once again, maybe I'm getting too philosophical, but something to think about. And as we conclude though, timekeeping, as you can tell from the story, has evolved from simple observations of natural phenomena to some very highly sophisticated technologies with years and years and honestly centuries of development. Each innovation has really reflected the needs and advancement of its time. And I think in some ways it also tells a story about human priorities. The sundials honored the sun, the water clocks represented nature's flow, and the digital devices chasing perfection. But amidst all of this time, the question still remains. Are we measuring time, or is time measuring us? But I want to thank you for spending your time with me, regardless of how you measured it. And if you learned something new or got value from this video, subscribe or comment which part you thought was the most interesting down below. But until next time, pun intended, remember, believe in yourself, believe in God, and amazing things will happen. I hope to see you guys again soon. God bless and peace.